Are the New York Cosmos back? Or maybe they're not the New York Cosmos anymore. We're going to talk about U.S. men's national team players transferring, perhaps. Today, a very special episode of Morning Kick Around. Stay with us. Hello, I'm Jason Davis, and this is Morning Kick Around. As you can see, Rob Kerr is on assignment elsewhere, unavailable to join us on a very Friday episode of Morning Kick Around. I don't do these intros anymore, so now I'm feeling like out of my element. I used to do them on my radio show. I don't have the solo radio show. I still do intros all the time on the radio, just not for this. But I want this to be a very special episode of Morning Kick Around. We're going to talk about the New York Cosmos. I've got lots to get into with the New York Cosmos coming back for the third iteration. I keep saying New York Cosmos, and that's a crutch, but we need to adjust our thinking on that, and I'll explain to you why that might be on this show today. I also want to do a little bit of an AMA question and answer segment, whatever you've got on your mind, if you're an MK Ultra or not. Throw stuff up in the chat. Producer Jenny is here. We're going to highlight some questions. If there's anything you want to talk about, maybe it's less a question than a point you want to make about American soccer right now. Maybe it's about the U.S. men's national team. Maybe it's about lower division soccer. Anything that's on your mind today. This is kind of a free-for-all Friday situation here on Morning Kick Around. But as I said, we've got New York Cosmos stuff to talk about rather. And so because it very much fits our vibe, I think we're going to call this, I think producer Jenny's going to help me out here. We're going to call this American Soccer is Weird. All right. Again, out of practice a little bit on this show, being the guy responsible for driving the train. But I do want to mention, if you want to join up and get some extra perks here with the Morning Kick Around community, you get access to the Discord, you get access to bonus shows and things that we're doing out there. Please go over and sign up on the channel to the Morning Kick Around MK Ultras scheme. You become a member, you get some bonus stuff. And that's all fun, and it's not a big lift. It's a couple of dollars per month for you to join there. You can also throw a little bit of money at us on Ko-Fi or Coffee.com if you so choose. That can be a one-time situation, but you'll also get access to the Discord. It won't limit you to only or limit that only to members. If you want to throw some money at us on Coffee, then you can do that as well. You can follow us on Blue Sky, Instagram. I think we do have an X presence. We may have to discuss that X presence and whether or not we want to continue it, but it's still there for the moment. Obviously, look, it's a YouTube channel. If you just want to like and subscribe, if you don't want to throw any money at us at all, you don't have any money, or you don't think we deserve your money, maybe we deserve a subscription. Maybe just hit the button there and be part of the MK Ultra community that way. That's a good way. And of course, if you want to email us, old-fashioned email, morningkickaround@gmail.com. Okay, this is American Soccer is Weird. And today, American Soccer is Weird because the New York Cosmos are coming back. And if you've been following, I think we talked about this on a previous episode, that there was rumors that the team that was going to be launched in USL League One in northern New Jersey, in Paterson, New Jersey, was going to be named the Cosmos. I believe Michael Batista of Hudson River Blue was the first one to have that news about a week ago. I think he dropped that story, or maybe a little bit less than that. That official announcement has now come, and there was a big to-do yesterday up there in Jersey about the Cosmos coming back, and we get to talk about it. Now, there are many facets to this story, but let's just start out with the wisdom of naming a new team in 2025 the Cosmos. I wrote about this a little bit for my newsletter, which you can find if you just Google Jason Davis Soccer Eagle. You'll find that on Google. I don't know what the actual URL is. It's on ghost.io. So if you want to look ghost.io Jason Davis, you'll find it there as well. I wrote about this, that this is a little bit tough for me, that I'm not necessarily thrilled about leaning into history that is questionable to begin with. Now, look, the Cosmos are obviously a famous name in American soccer, perhaps the most famous name in American soccer. And why wouldn't they be when Pelé and Beckenbauer and Canalia and Carlos Alberto played for them during the NASL 1.0 heyday? They made a lot of hay off of the names of those players who came in an era where players moving like that wasn't really a thing. Remember, that's pre-Bosman. It's sort of pre-big transfers, pre-Premier League. There was no sense that players could like sort of jump countries like that and sort of play wherever they wanted. And obviously, because NASL operated outside of the typical global soccer marketplace, it allowed them to attract these players with some big salaries. Now, we know the story, though. The Cosmos collapsed, as did the rest of the NASL. Now, I know there are some old soccer heads out there and some people who are students of history would say, well, the NASL only survived as long as it did because of the New York Cosmos. And that's probably a fair statement. But you also have to recognize that ultimately the whole thing failed. Ultimately, the whole thing collapsed. It had no staying power. It was sort of, I think it was frozen in time on some level. That the way, because the Cosmos had this glory moment in the late 70s. And by the way, after Pele left, they still played, they still had another 7-8 years of playing in the NASL and obviously watching their attendance collapse after Pele left. So it's odd that we kind of focus on that highlight, that high watermark 70s period, and sort of make the Cosmos into this glamour team when there were lots of non-glamour years, both before Pele arrived and after. And this is what I wrote on the newsletter. The power of nostalgia in this instance is a curiosity for me. The implosion of the original NASL somehow froze the Cosmos in time as a glamour team, or full of glamour players. I have a typo in there, full of glamour players, even though most of those players had retired or left by the end of the 1970s. There is a fetishization of failure that lifts the Cosmos name 40 years after the club played any decent soccer, and it seems to be combining with this natural desire to celebrate whatever shred of soccer history we have in America, and leads to this. Okay, now we can talk about the modern iteration, right? We can talk about where the NASL 2.0 New York Cosmos were. I want to get to that as well. But I just want to address this thing about the nostalgia and the history of the Cosmos, because it's Eric Stover is a connecting element to the new team in Paterson and the NASL 2.0 team that played at Hofstra on Long Island, right? In Western Long Island. He is a guy who was an executive with the New York Red Bulls, one executive of the year in Major League Soccer, helped build Red Bull Arena, now Sports Illustrated, whatever that is. Obviously was part of the New York Cosmos revival when it was good, right? When after they kind of came out of this, we're a t-shirt company era and actually got going again, they did some good things. They obviously were very good in the league that they played in. He's the connective tissue here. But it's not as though this new team in Paterson is trading on the team that played on Long Island. They're trading on the Pele Canalia Cosmos. Just let's be honest about that, right? And of course, when you see the news stories that are popping up in the New York metropolitan area in the media, and I watched a couple of them this morning, or you read the stories, Pele, Beckenbauer always get mentioned, always. Right now, as Willem, excuse me, they were great a decade ago when they brought in Raul and Arango. They were. But that nobody talks about those players when they talk about the Cosmos and the glory of the Cosmos and bringing back the Cosmos name. Shout out to Faith and Logic, by the way. Thank you for being a member. Thank you for becoming an ultra. Nobody talks about Raul and Arango. They talk about, or Giovanni Savarese, who was the guy who led them to that success, who parlayed that into an MLS coaching career. They talk about Pele and Beckenbauer. And I'll bring in a little bit of a comment from outside of this. Is not me. This is Eugene Rupinski on Blue Sky. Okay, and this is one person's opinion. And by the way, Eugene, you can see it says Golazo del Gringo. He covers Mexican football if you want to follow Eugene. To me, history is sacrosanct. The original Cosmos history should not be able to be appropriated by a third division team playing in Paterson, New Jersey, with no connection to the original club beyond somehow grabbing their trademark. This club should be looking forward to writing its own history. And that's sort of where my brain goes to, right? I think about how we just talked to the guy who started AV Alta out there in Lancaster, California. We've talked to the owner of Westchester. We've talked to owners around. We talked to Michael Hitchcock, who's launched several high-level semi-pro teams in the United States and connected with communities. Obviously, short season and the marketing is different, and I'm not trying to compare them. They're a little bit apples and oranges. But what we got from Hitch, and certainly what we got from John Smelzer of AV Alta, is how important it was to them to connect to their communities. Right? How important it was to have their teams identified with their communities, their specific place that they lived, whether that's Annapolis, Maryland, or Lubbock, Texas, or Lancaster, California, or whatever. They want those teams to reflect those specific communities. How is grabbing the Cosmos name for a team in Paterson, New Jersey, which is in the New York metropolitan area, obviously, how is that connecting with the community? Like, I don't begrudge anybody in this very difficult business of American soccer the right to chase some cheap heat. And that's what this is. This is cheap heat. Now, apparently Rocco Commisso, who owned the Cosmos 2.0 and obviously went to war with U.S. Soccer and MLS because of some of the things that happened with the New York Cosmos 2.0. He's involved. He's a minority owner per the reports, and all of the intellectual property was bought from Rocco to be used here in Paterson. So they chose to make that. Maybe this couldn't have happened without Rocco's money. Maybe the team wouldn't exist without Rocco's money, in which case maybe the Cosmos thing is part and parcel of the new team. Maybe Rocco said, I'll help you start this new team, but you got to use the Cosmos name. I don't know. Nobody knows that. I mean, we don't have that information, and I'm hoping to get Eric Stover on Morning Kick Around in the near future. I've reached out to Eric. We'll see if he responds. I'm not suggesting he's dodging me. I'm sure he's a very busy guy, but I'd like to get Eric Stover, who is a major principal of this, on the show to see what he can tell us about this process and about the ownership and about the origin of this team. And the reason I bring up sort of like, is this the right thing to do, is because when you look at where the Cosmos have played, okay, where they have been located in the New York metropolitan area, you can barely see this. It's because I'm trying to squeeze this all in here, but you can see some of you can see the little marks where I have these flags. These are the places that the New York Cosmos have played. I may be missing one or two. I'm not sure. But at the bottom, okay, let's start with the original Cosmos. You can see there is a flag just there, a little bit north of Newark on I-95. That's the Meadowlands, right? So that's where, in the heyday, now I know they played on Randall's Island and there's some other things in the early days of the Cosmos, but let's just talk about the heyday of the Cosmos, Pele and Beckenbauer. That's where they played. That's where they got 70,000 people to show up to watch them play soccer on artificial turf laid over concrete. That was the heyday of the Cosmos. Then you have the 2.0. Launched in 2010, won a bunch of trophies, Giovanni Savarese, Raul, Arango, the whole thing. That's over there, Hempstead, right? Very near Hempstead, East Meadow. That's Long Island. It's east of Queens, right? It's out there in the suburbs. Not so far in the suburbs that it's sort of off the map, but still the suburbs. Then, when the NASL collapsed, and I think I have my timeline right here, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but when the NASL 2.0 collapsed and the Cosmos sort of moved on into the next iteration, they played a little bit at that baseball stadium, the minor league baseball stadium, which I think is getting a new team, right? Brooklyn FC is going to be playing in that minor league baseball stadium way down there at the bottom of the map, Brighton Beach. That's Coney Island. Okay? And scale is a little tough here, but if you know anything, obviously, about the New York metropolitan area, you know these places are far, not just in terms of like distance. We're talking about in terms of getting from place to place. And then way up in the top left-hand corner, and actually covers the name Paterson, is the stadium that they're going to be playing next. This new iteration of the Cosmos playing in Paterson, New Jersey at Hinchliffe Stadium, which is historic and is very, we're going to show you some visuals. It's pretty nice. And it could be great. It's just, this is this sort of breadth of locations in the New York area in 2 different states, in multiple counties. None of this. I mean, some of the early days again happened on Randall's Island and things like that. But generally speaking, we're talking about a team that's sort of like been on the fringes of the New York metropolitan area for the most part. I just think that that's interesting. And I don't know if it means anything. And I'm not trying to, again, tear down the need to get some heat in the early stages. And they did. They got some heat. I'm talking about, I'd be talking about this team anyway on some level, but I'm probably talking about it more because they're bringing in the Cosmos name, right? They're getting on local television. They're getting written up by The Athletic. That was pointed out by several people that, hey, maybe they wouldn't be written up by The Athletic if they weren't using the Cosmos name. Okay, so let's talk about the look and feel of this, because I think this is indicative of something, and then I'll get to the stadium. So this is the new badge. It's very big on my screen here. I'm going to make it smaller, don't worry, but this is the new badge. I just want to show you. First of all, it says Cosmos. It does not say New York Cosmos. Now, this team's going to play in New Jersey, so that makes some sense. In fact, here's what I'll do. I'll show you this. This is the evolution of the New York Cosmos logo in a very simplified way. There was some other things happened in between some of these dates, but for the most part, the very early years of the Cosmos, up until Pele left, or up until, I guess, the year before Pele left, because Pele left in 1978, the Cosmos used New York on their badge. They also revived that badge for the second iteration that played at Hofstra. I'm pretty sure that used that logo for most of that time. Maybe there were tweaks, but they were minimal. Then you have the Cosmos. Now, they changed it also to black, which I don't think is an improvement. That dropped the name New York because they weren't playing in New York anymore. They were playing in New Jersey. They were capitalizing on the Pelé Beckenbauer thing, trying to get 70,000 people out to Giant Stadium, and they dropped the name New York in the badge. And that's where we are now. So the 2025 version cleaned up, like sharpened some of the edges. And there's actually an explainer. I'm going to show you that too, because yeah, there's got to be an explainer. They're explaining a logo that goes back 50 years. Okay. So, or more than that, actually. The 2025 version. All right, so that's what I'll do here. I'm going to show you the explainer. This is what they put out. The new New York Cosmos, announced for Paterson, New Jersey. Historic badge, global icon, new purpose. Simplified ball. They did simplify it. You could see it in that last image I showed where they comparing the logos. They simplified the ball. Cleaner, easier to print, all those things. Those are all important things in modern imaging. So again, there's that explanation. Simply Cosmos. The team is back in New Jersey, so New York is dropped. Custom logo type updated to the original Othello type version. I don't care about the type that much, but obviously it looks fine. That thing, though. So we're not going to call them the New Jersey Cosmos. We're not going to call them the North Jersey Cosmos. We're not going to call them the Paterson Cosmos. We're going to call them Cosmos. Even the Cosmos. Just the Cosmos? Is that what we're doing? Updated blue. Brighter than the previous iteration, closer to the original version. All right. Bolder navy, it says. It just prints better. Okay. I mean, I guess we're at least having some fun with this. There is a removal of the outer border, accessibility, and inclusiveness. I mean, that's nonsense. That's, again, reverse engineering. That's nonsense. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't be inclusive and have accessibility. I'm just saying, like, they took that extra ring out because they didn't like it, or because somebody thought it printed better or was cleaner. Blades. Blades evoke movement. Sharper corner detail that helps modernize the look. I mentioned that. I do think that's an improvement, that it's sharper. The blades evoke movement? Yellow and green reference the original Brazilian connection. Wait a second. Is that's what that is? There was always yellow and green. Do they always have Brazilians? All right, I'm very confused by this. Yellow and blue reference the colors of New Jersey and Passaic County. They just happen to be the same colors as Passaic County. All right, let's see what you guys think. They should be just Cosmos FC, no New York and no New Jersey. I think that's what they're going for, and I do think that is that's a choice, and I'll even call it a bold choice that I have some respect for. because in the modern and in the modern era, and especially when we have new teams popping up in various leagues, a lot of times leagues will require teams to have names that identify where they're from because it's just better, right? Especially in American soccer where sometimes teams are not well known. Obviously, they're trading on the idea that everybody knows the Cosmos. Now, when people hear the Cosmos are back, are they going to connect it to New Jersey? Are they going to go, oh, where they're going to have to go look for where they're playing? I would imagine is part of this. I think that is an interesting element of this story. All right, now look, if this is going to work, right? If this is going to be a success in Paterson, New Jersey, then they have to have some of the right ingredients, right? Now we've seen some teams start out very well in American soccer recently, and it's why I have some real hope that this is going to work out. And the Cosmos element is almost secondary. Like the identity of the team matters. I'm not going to say it doesn't, but I think what matters more is that you have smart soccer people involved, that you have ownership that is committed and is not going to skip town the first sign of trouble or decide to punt once things get a little bit difficult. Maybe when the team's not winning, or maybe when there's not as many people in the stands as you would like, right? And then there's a stadium and there's a place to call home. And so many teams in recent American soccer history have disappeared, dropped off the map because of their stadium problems. They were maybe a little bit overambitious, or they started out with we're going to launch a team here and then we're going to build a stadium, and then that stadium never gets built. Or we're going to launch a team and we're going to play in this venue, and then that venue the lease runs out, or the price gets jacked up. They don't control it. They don't have no. I don't know specifically every detail of the relationship between this club and the county, Passaic County, and Paterson, and all of that. There's some element. I think this stadium is technically owned by the school district in Paterson, New Jersey. I don't know every element of that agreement, but obviously there's at least something positive here in that they have identified this as a place where they can play games, and they think it's going to work, and it's sort of appropriately sized for what they want to be. Now, none of this is going to address pro rel and moving up divisions and whether they have to increase capacity if they want to do that and these kind of things. And obviously, as we go back to what Eugene said, a third division team playing in Paterson, New Jersey. That's part of the reason it bothers him when it comes to the name Cosmos. This is a third division team that's going to play in Paterson, New Jersey. So what does that look like? Well, here's Hinchliffe Stadium, overview, or a bird's eye view of Hinchliffe Stadium. Again, there's history here. The New York Black Yankees played in this building. I think the New York Cubans was a Negro League baseball team played here. There's been various events over the years. It was actually closed for a while, and they only reopened it in 2023. It's not ideal. There's a running track. There's an open end. It's not covered in any place where the stands are not covered. It's not some incredible stadium. But again, for what they're aiming at, I think it is probably it is at least a positive that a lot of clubs don't start out life with. And I'm going to throw up this video as well, which is a drone shot. Apparently, there's an incredibly picturesque and beautiful waterfall right next to Hinchliffe Stadium. So I guess that's a selling point if you're in Paterson or in the area. And one other element of this that I think is giving me good vibes and making me hopeful that this is going to be successful is that Giuseppe Rossi is involved. Giuseppe Rossi is a native of the area, right? He was born in Teaneck. He grew up in Clifton. We're talking about minutes drive from this stadium in Paterson. He obviously left as a young soccer player in his teen years, early before he was even a teenager, to go to Europe and to develop as a player. He had that opportunity through his family. He took it. He obviously ended up being an Italian international, right? Much to the chagrin of many American soccer fans, Giuseppe Rossi decided to be an Italian international. But he is a Jersey kid through and through. You listen to him talk. There's no doubt that guy's from New Jersey. I've had a chance to interview him, and I think that he is a true believer in the importance of opening up pathways for young players in this country. And he sees this and his involvement in this team as his chance to put his efforts where his mouth is. I mean, I don't know how much money Giuseppe Rossi is putting into this. In fact, I think he's going to be, an employee of the team, or they're gonna have him as their guy running the developmental part of this club. There are lots of things to figure out, and they do have to put a good quality product on the field as a professional outfit if they're going to make this work. That is absolutely a major part of this. But except for my discomfort over co-opting the Cosmos name, except for my feeling that's a mismatch, right? The Cosmos and the history, and even the 2.0 history, kind of not lining up exactly with a team in North Jersey playing in the third division. I'm hopeful about this. I'm positive about this. And again, you have to recognize that this team has a lot of the ingredients necessary to be successful, and that choosing the Cosmos name means they can leverage a little bit of extra attention in order to fire off. And they've only got a year runway. Now, I think they announced this group back in May, and here we are, it's July, and they've announced the name, and they're planning on playing in 2026. So they're not too far away from putting a team on the field. I will bring in some questions. If you guys have any comments you want to put out about this, just some things that I want to address here. We've got, this is about the stadium situations. RIP San Diego Loyal, Memphis 901, both lost their clubs when they couldn't get permanent homes. I think, it's reasonable to ask if the Loyal would still exist if they had managed to find a permanent place to play before San Diego FC arrived. But definitely Memphis 901 is another example of this. Again, minor league baseball stadium for their home, and it didn't work out for them. Alan saying, an interesting what if. If Rocco's 2013 stadium proposal for the former Belmont Park racetrack was approved and built, they would probably be, and got cut off. First of all, let's be clear about that. Rocco was not involved in those original plans to build at Belmont Park. That's pre-Rocco. Rocco bought the club, I believe, in 2017. Now, it feels like Rocco was sort of always around, but remember, Rocco packed a lot of action into a very short time frame. So he bought the club. They had already been very successful as part of SELA, One World Sports, and I know there's some confusion over who was actually owning and running them, Seamus O'Brien, and there's some really shady stuff going on back then. But that was the organization, that was the group that was behind the Belmont racetrack plan to build a stadium. Rocco bought the team sort of after that all collapsed, and obviously, the league collapsed around all of that, and they weren't able to obviously go on. In fact, I actually do have an image of that Belmont Park plan, which I think we referenced on a previous episode. This is the concept for the stadium that the Cosmos wanted to build at Belmont Park there on Long Island. I think it's Nassau County, right? I think they wanted to build this stadium. And this is also around the time when there was a thought that maybe the Cosmos could go into Major League Soccer. MLS was looking for a second New York team. This is prior to City Football Group coming in and spending a bunch of money to get into Major League Soccer. And obviously we know now that they have plans to build their stadium. And, I'm not sure that either of those are ideal situations. Obviously we have some people who would be uncomfortable with City Football Group, but there was also some questionable money maybe behind One World Sports and SELA and all of that and what was going on there. I don't have time to dive into all of that history. At some point, maybe what I'll do is get Mark Fishkin or somebody who is around and kind of watching all of that unfold so that we can relive some of the weirdest moments. Dave Martinez, who I don't know where Dave is. I got to get in touch with him. Some of you know Dave Martinez. He was writing about the old Cosmos quite a bit. So we'll maybe come back around on that story. But there's another wrinkle to this. And this is very American Soccer is Weird. I don't know how many people are aware of this guy, Scott Michaels. Some of you might be. Scott Michaels appears, and I've only sort of come across this through other people bringing it up because it's so weird. I haven't actually engaged with it myself. But Scott Michaels appears to be a guy who, an entrepreneur, I guess. In fact, I'm looking right now at something he posted on LinkedIn last week about his idea to bring a new soccer league to America. Right? He does call himself the matchmaker. I actually don't know the origin of that, and it gives him a very scummy vibe that I think fits here. I mentioned this just because it's weird. Like, I don't want to give this guy any credibility whatsoever. I don't think he has any. Again, I'm looking at this very long LinkedIn post that he wrote about trying to build a soccer league. And what he wanted to do was leverage all of the old NASL intellectual property, all those names, all those brands, all those iconic. I mean, outside obviously the Rowdies who exist, but I think he was always trying to sort of line up something that would capitalize on dead names from the original NASL. And so he's been lurking around this. Again, Mark Fishkin's a great resource because he's been kind of tracking what Scott Michaels has been doing on the internet. And again, he is trying. First of all, he's English, right? He's English. He's trying to do something with this American soccer thing, and he did not respond well to the announcement that the New York Cosmos are back. We've got this post over on X, as some other account posted that the Cosmos are coming back. No, they are not sorry. He is apparently fully engaged in some legal battle to try to grab the Cosmos name, and he's got screenshots of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, some screenshots there that suggest that there's a battle that he is chasing down these trademarks because they have been abandoned or something. This is a little bit too much patent attorney for me. I've engaged with this stuff a little bit, but as you can see there, he says there are now 3 active TTAB cancellation proceedings against Cosmos trademarks, followed by Football is for the Fans Inc., which is his business, by the way. Football is for the fans, but it's also for Scott Michaels. Okay. He has apparently bought some things and gotten some stuff, I guess. I don't know. And again, there's also this element of, is he doing stuff in England that maybe doesn't apply in the U.S.? This is public record on the USPTO's TTAB system. Go look it up for yourself. Fraudulent renewals, abandonment, and no use since 2020. The filings are under legal fire. That he's not enjoying this. And then, man, this one. They've spent millions marketing a logo they might lose in court. USL just dropped a full rebrand campaign of the Cosmos under a trademark currently being challenged for fraud, abandonment, and non-use. He says that their new logo is not registered. The legacy they're banking on, Pelé and Beckenbauer, are long gone. The real Cosmos legacy is being dragged through a third-tier PR circus while the legal rights are in question. And then he mentions that nobody at the launch of this new team asked any of these questions about the trademark, which, again, for him to try to claim that he is operating in good faith in regards to the Cosmos name, real fans deserve better. Real Cosmos fans are watching. All right, Scott, you tell me where those are and who are on your side and maybe who are upset about this. And I know there are Cosmos fans, not just sort of the modern Cosmos fans from the 2.0 era, but Cosmos fans who go back to the original NESL. And I'm curious how they feel about this, right? I am curious how those fans are sort of processing this news that there's going to be another Cosmos 3.0. Now, again, because in American soccer, we don't have a lot of history. Like we don't have a lot of consistent history. What we have are these sort of skipping stones things, and one of them is the Cosmos. And so, again, I'll come back to my original comments about the nostalgia element and how it's impacting my feelings about this. Do we need to leave that in history? Whether it was a failure or a success, do we need to just leave that in history? Not because Scott Michaels says he wants the trademark, but because it's better to start new things that are directly connected. Like, I'm wearing my Oakland Roots shirt today, one of them. That's a great example of a club who built an identity that connects with their local community. Now, maybe there wasn't something obvious for them to grab onto that would be, tapping into some sort of American soccer history. So what other option did they have? I guess you could argue that. But I still think that they are an example of maybe, how you should do it in 2025, rather than, of course, again, to lean into a history that you're barely connected with, if at all. But again, I want to talk to Eric Stover. I want to talk to the people involved in this team. I'd like to get Giuseppe Rossi back, and Giuseppe Rossi is not responsible for the branding, and I wouldn't hold his feet to the fire over whether this is a good idea or not. I don't think that's fair. That's not his role in this. But I'd be curious to know what he thinks about, bringing a team to his hometown, so to speak, and not making it about that hometown or about the region or the area, but to make it about something that happened on the other side of the New York metropolitan area, that happened in a borough, or I guess down the road in Jersey. Again, there is that, of course. And again, Cosmos, not New York Cosmos for this club. I think that is, if I'm going to give them any credit at all, I guess there's that they're sort of saying, and I don't know, maybe that's not even worth something worth celebrating. Maybe it's just a matter of, the simplest thing to do for them was to take the New York off because they're not New York, and that would ring hollow. And because they don't seem to be. I mean, this is the incongruity of this for me. Cosmos is a globally recognized name. It feels like something that sometimes clubs do to try to be globally important, or try to reach beyond their local community to sell jerseys or whatever benefits might come from that, right? To sort of have a bigger presence. Some teams do it through being creative with their branding and their jerseys, and it sort of comes naturally and feels somewhat organic. Forward Madison's an example of this. I don't think anybody could argue that Forward Madison hasn't been focused on the market of Madison, Wisconsin. I mean, they got the flamingo on their badge, for cripe's sake, and that's based on some lore about flamingos being on what I think the city hall's lawn or something, some practical joke that happened. I mean, that's so inside Madison baseball that it's, the rest of us are like, what? There's a flamingo. It's Wisconsin. But that makes them connected to the community in a way that isn't for you and me if we don't live there. But through their jersey design and some of the other things that they've done, they have gotten some global prominence. They chose a color that makes them stand out. And that's one way to do it. I mean, again, they kind of took a more difficult road to being relevant outside Madison in a way that can help them as they try to be good in Madison and capture the attention of Madison and sell tickets in Madison and win games in Madison. Here is a team that said, the easiest way for us to get attention is to just co-opt the Cosmos name. And if we can get Rocco Camiso on board, who, as far as I'm aware, owns intellectual property, not Scott Michaels or whatever. And again, this is the complicated nature of our relationship to this. Let me bring in some comments from my man Mike Thomas. Cosmos branding, big picture success sort of hinges on USL's pro rel bet and this team ascending to a top tier that maybe someday kind of rivals MLS. That's a question. And again, this is where if there wasn't any hint of pro rel coming to USL, this would feel really weird. Maybe because there's some idea that pro rel is going to happen because they're at least making moves towards that. We can imagine the Cosmos ascending, and then it would feel like they are sort of at a level that better fits their brand. Now, they can't do anything, at least in the short term, about having a 7,800 seat stadium in Paterson, New Jersey, that doesn't really fit the bill as a top level soccer stadium in this country. As pretty as this is, that's not a top level soccer stadium in this country. So if they do ascend the ranks, I mean, they can't go to the top division if the PLS requires 15,000 seats. And maybe that's a bridge you cross when you get there. I don't know. Maybe they get a waiver for this particular team. Those are things that are here. Right? And then this part from Mike. I secretly kind of like the brand being back in the conversation. Me too. I feel uncomfortable with so much of this. But man, okay. All right. Mike is just firing off great stuff here. Field chair with the Red Bulls. Now, LOL at the end means he's not being serious. But what if it comes to that? What if it comes to the New York sorry, I keep doing it. The Cosmos have now won their way up to the top division, but they can't play at Hinchliffe Stadium in Paterson because it's not big enough. It doesn't have the right the right elements. It doesn't meet the standards of the top division for PLS. Okay, well, they'll just go ground share with the Red Bulls. Maybe they work that out. Maybe they ground share with the Red Bulls. I'm not sure. It's definitely possible, but let's say that they can figure that out. Is that what we want? Is that a good thing? Right? Maybe conceivably by that point they have established themselves in North Jersey, and people are just sort of rallying around them, and it might not matter exactly that they play in Patterson anymore. But as we sort of talk about the romance of some of these places in America getting their own teams, Lancaster, California, Lubbock, Texas, Annapolis, Maryland. I mean, those are not pro teams; those are amateur teams. But my point is, as we talk about like dotting the map with more soccer teams in places that are not going to get sort of major league attention, right? The big money attention. They wouldn't measure up for an NFL franchise or an NBA franchise, but they definitely could have a pro soccer franchise. And I'll team rather. I'll come back to something that John Smelzer said in our interview that we did about AV Alta. He said, because USL League One exists, and because the expansion fees and the financial commitment is not insane to get into USL League One, that means they don't have to be anybody's farm team, right? They have an independent identity. They're playing for a championship that everybody recognizes is a couple of tiers below Major League Soccer, of course. But they can say to their fans, we're our own thing. We stand on our own 2 feet. We are not connected to somebody else. Our players aren't going to level up to another team because they get called. If our players are good enough to go somewhere else, we'll sell them. And as a club, we'll benefit. Right? That is, I think, ideal for a lot of us. It's not the only way to do it. And if you're a practical person, if you're sort of a realpolitik American soccer fan, you may think, screw all that. Just make teams that succeed. Who cares how you do it? But of course, we've got evidence in places like Lancaster that you can do it that way and have it be successful. I know it's year 1 in Lancaster, and maybe we need to wait a little bit. I don't want to jump the gun on saying, oh, that team's such a big success when, year 3 and year 4 and year 5 could be different. But that independence is obviously part of this story. And if the Cosmos, again, it's not that they wouldn't be independent anymore, but if they decided to move stadiums in the chase for higher level soccer, because now we've got ProRel existing in USL, does that undermine the spirit of what they are supposed to be? I don't know, man. It's a lot of elements to this that I think are fascinating, and I'm not even sure I'm clear on all of it. If you do want some more thoughts from me, though, go check out my newsletter, ghost.io. Look for Jason Davis. Type in Soccer Eagle if you want to do that. I just named it that to help people find it, and because it was a joke on the radio show back in the day. But there is that. All right, at this point, let me tell you what you can do to help support the show. Become a member, become an ultra, like and subscribe. Those are all the things you can do. First of all, like and subscribe, which costs you nothing because you're already on YouTube. Just hit the button, hit the bell, become a subscriber to Morning Kick Around. Also, this is a good place to tell you to tell people about us, especially if you like what we're doing on some of the lower division stories. Go tell people that we're out here covering American soccer, maybe telling people, telling stories that aren't being told other places. You can, again, become a member, become an MK Ultra, get access to the Discord, which is popping off. Lots of people in there talking about American soccer. There is some very nerdy stuff, and I say that with love. Some incredibly nerdy stuff happening in our Discord. People talking about their local teams, all kinds of stuff. So sign up, couple bucks a month as a member on the channel. I think we got at least one new member today, right? I mentioned Faith and Logic signed up as a member. Shout out to Faith and Logic for becoming a member and an MK Ultra. That is awesome. What else do I need to tell people about? You can follow us on X, Instagram, and Blue Sky. X for now. We'll see. Instagram, Blue Sky for sure. You can reach out at morningkickaround@gmail.com. Send us a message. Oh, and we're a podcast. I mentioned we're a podcast. Yeah, if you don't have time to listen to the show or watch the show via YouTube, go find us as a podcast. We're out there. Actually, if you go watch the show on Spotify after the fact, that's a good thing for us. You can do that. And while I'm plugging, I know I have like a bunch of different things I'm doing. There's a new Best Soccer show out this morning. Jared Dubois and I got together last night, talking about the Gold Cup stuff for the U.S. men's national team. So if you need a break from Cosmos discussion or whatever, and you want some U.S. men's national team stuff, go listen to the new Best Soccer show. which is out there and available. All right, we got a little bit of time left in our normal hour. I think what I want to do is turn this into a big question where we're going to answer questions, take your questions here live on Morning Kicker Up. All right, big question here on Morning Kicker Out. This is a free-for-all. This is going to be just whatever you want to throw at me, a sort of AMA vibe here on the show, because Rob is off on assignment doing other business, and I am here all by myself. I want to shout out all of the MK Ultras who are in the chat this morning. Thomas Donnelly, I like this. This was obviously off our Cosmos discussion and lower division soccer in America. There's no real right way. The U.S. just needs more clubs. The game needs to represent as many people as possible. I'm sure there are different routes to achieve that. And they do need to be appropriate to where you are. I mean, there's not one size fits all. One approach is the way to go. I think there are some best practices that can be brought into this. And I think there are some things that are sort of universal. But to Thomas's point, there will be places in this country where, because of a difficulty getting a stadium deal done, or, and I don't mean building one, but just finding one, or maybe something to do with identity, maybe something to do with whether the competition there is for dollars for people who want to go out and see sports, you may have to approach it a very different way. So there is that. Let's see, what else do we have here? Again, lots of people talking about lower division soccer in the chat, so I want to acknowledge all of that. Mike Thomas, the irony with the Cosmos thing is that they were the NY team option versus the New York team versus the New Jersey team when they had the NASL 2.0 launch. That is interesting, right? So that's a little bit of a switch now because, well, I mean, there's still a team in New Jersey in the Red Bulls right down the road, a higher level. But again, that's why this is interesting to me that they chose the Cosmos, because you could set yourself up in sort of opposition to the more expensive trip to go see the Red Bulls in the giant stadium or the bigger stadium. You could be the local option. You could be like, and this is, I'm going to kind of, make this analogous to minor league baseball. It's not, because as we identified, these teams have their own identities. They're independent. They're not connected to some structure of minor league baseball like major league baseball is. But there is that vibe, that connection that you can create with a team and the players in that sort of environment. That's why I fell in love with minor league baseball as a kid, because I could go down to the rail and I could talk directly to the players and they were going to spend time with me, and there weren't 50,000 other people around. I wasn't competing on that level, and it felt very intimate to me. I think that's something as well. Question here from Mike, again, about lower division soccer. Is the Brooklyn team still alive? I do believe Brooklyn FC is still a thing, and I think we talked about that club on a video a couple months ago, maybe. This is the team, as I mentioned earlier in the show, that is going to play in that minor league baseball stadium in Brooklyn, on Coney Island, Maimonides Park. I'm going to butcher that every single time. It's just something about that, the vowels in the combination there. So I think the goal for them is to launch their USL men's team next year. They have a women's team. There is that. We'll have to catch up on that. 2026. Okay. Thank you very much. Soccer Night in Detroit. Another member, another MK Ultra, 2026. All right. So again, sort of talking about the way that our map makes it difficult for American soccer to sort of thrive in the same ways that it might in other places. And I don't just mean because as a culture, we have other sports that take primacy over soccer. But for example, we talked again to John Smelser about the state of USL League One, and he talked about the number of teams coming into USL League One and how eventually he hopes that they'll be able to regionalize. So maybe that's just conferences, East and West, something like that, that it will help with the travel cost and the expenses of running a minor league soccer team, a lower division soccer team. And obviously this is a major factor in whether these teams survive, right? The ultimate cost of doing business is massive, a massive factor in whether they can continue year in and year out. And again, because I've watched so many teams come and go, because there are so many dead teams in the American soccer graveyard, very sensitive to the idea that you launch a team without a plan, without a sense of making it work long term. Like, I think it's completely irresponsible for somebody to say, I'm going to launch a soccer team in a town, not have a clear 5 or 10-year plan for how you're going to fund that team, right? This is why there are PLS standards around around majority ownership and the net worth of individuals. Not, I mean, it is restrictive, right? The knock-on effect is it's restrictive. And if you talk to Peter Wilt and people like that, they'll say that shouldn't be. We need to have community ownership and other ways for teams to exist. But the simplest way for U.S. soccer to try to guard against teams collapsing was that net worth element. So here is Chris. I just want a pro team within a 4.5-hour drive. I don't even live in like Montana, Dakotas, or non-mainland. I live in Baton Rouge. I think we identify Baton Rouge as a team that needs to, or a place that needs to have a team. Yeah, this is so much of what we are trying to figure out. And I will say this too. So again, after talking to John Smeltzer and the regionalization that might come to USL and how that might benefit an operation like his, if you take a national league and you split it up and you say, okay, it's got conferences or it's got divisions, we're all accustomed to that. Like, we've all been normalized to that through American sports for decades and decades. But the idea of sort of regional leagues, some of you will recall, some of you have been around long enough to recall when we went over the pro rel plan that was very speculative and really didn't go anywhere back in the late 80s before MLS came around. That U.S. soccer, that there was a plan written that had like all of these different tiers. It had top national division, but down the ladder, it had regional divisions. I mean, you could even view this, if you want to, as corresponding with the way that English football operates sort of after, when you get to non-league football, and even below that, obviously, there are regional leagues, or there are leagues that are for specific areas. Now, those are what, amateur leagues? They're not paying their players. And what we want are professional leagues. And I think the sense is that if a league is going to be professional, it's got to be national. It's got to kind of cover the whole breadth of the country if it's going to be a professional league. And do you undermine the credibility of a professional league if it is, say, limited to one region? Like, if we wanted to organize American soccer in a way that sort of made some sense financially for the clubs, wouldn't it be better to have a national outdoor men's first division, the way that we do, maybe a second division that is also national, although the size of that division is sort of like up for debate. MLS has gone zooming past normal numbers. The USL Championship zooming past what is typical of a second division or a top men's division. And obviously they have that plan to go ahead and make that first division at the top end of their pro rel system. But if we want to talk about below that, I mean, certainly when the money gets to be different, and down there it's going to be different, right? The second division, it's different than the first. The third division is different than the second. If you're talking about those levels, and you're talking about not the people that are behind those teams not having a lot of money and the revenue not being big, maybe you just need to regionalize. But if we had like 4 third division leagues, is that better? Is that a better way to do this? I don't even know if I've really kind of wrestled with that. I don't know. Yeah, there's some lot of questions there. Okay, so I think what we're gonna do here, because this is a bit of a free for all. I know this was an AMA, but we ended up talking about the same stuff we were talking about before, which I think is fascinating, and I do appreciate everybody throwing us in. Maybe what we can do is add another voice to this show. So I think in a minute or two, we're going to grab Michael Batista, who writes at Hudson River Blue and is the guy who originally had the story about the name for the new team in Jersey being the New York Cosmos. And he will give us a little insight as to sort of what they might have been thinking when they threw it together. I definitely want to highlight Michael and his work. because he, again, was that guy. He was the guy that was out front of this story. So I think we're going to have Michael Batista in just a minute or two, and maybe we'll do a little bonus with him on this episode. Going back to the chat, again, regionality makes it more financially viable. Adding MLS2 teams and expanding the footprint of USL helped the viability for independent teams wildly and allowed it to grow where it is today. Okay, there's that, right? This part, have a national playoff at the end of the year. That's the way you would have to do it, right? Especially if you have Pro-Rel, you would have to have a funneling of teams to a national tournament that would then determine. Now, in terms of the integrity of the leagues and sort of the fairness of who gets promoted and stuff, I mean, I guess everybody signs off and everybody agrees the best way to do it, then fine, whatever. But obviously, if you have sort of regionality and relative strength is different from league to league, it gets into that. It gets into that kind of question of like, is it fair to everybody? But again, because playoffs are not the measure of a team the way that a full season is. Now, the way that I think about this is playing 30 plus games in a regular season is one test of a team, and playing in a playoff tournament is a different kind of test. And if you want to be champion, say in Major League Soccer, you got to be good at both. You got to find a way to be at least good enough during the regular season to make the playoffs, and then you got to figure out how to be a good playoff team. And those are different challenges. And just because most of domestic club football in the rest of the world doesn't follow that format, just because they choose to end their season after all the season games are played and reward their championship, doesn't mean that playoffs are invalid. It just means they're different. But if we are sort of normalized to this idea that the right way to judge a team is by its regular season and by the points it collects over 30 plus games, then playoffs feel wrong. They feel like a cheaper way to determine a champion, or a more unfair way to determine a champion. So, those things are sort of in the air when we talk about this organization. And by the way, all of this requires somebody to have enough power, somebody to bring all these parties together to try to figure this out. And I don't want to get too in the weeds on my discussion about league over club in American soccer, but that's a major hurdle to this. You got a major stumbling block to getting to anything like we're talking about, is that each one of these leagues is a separate business that operates in its own best interests, and those best interests don't always align. I mean, it's why when we talk about Pro-Rel, we're only talking about USL doing it within their ecosystem, because they control that. They are in charge of it. They are not subject to what other leagues want to do. But it also means that because MLS is its own business, operating its own best interests, it will not be connected to a Pro-Rel pyramid that involves all of those USL teams. And that, again, feels wrong and feels like we're being sold a weaker product, or that we're missing out on the possibility. I see everybody is completely organizing this new this new structure in the chat. State leagues and state selections like mini national teams. Wow. Well, that's a concept that comes up in American soccer every now and then, that those state teams, we'll have to talk about who's going to win. Jersey, Texas, California, who's got the best team? That would be fun. State of origin type stuff like they do down in Australia with, is that rugby they do that with, or is that, yeah, it's rugby, right? All right, here we go. Division 2, 40 teams split into 2 divisions. Division 3, 80 teams split into 4 divisions, play home and away. Yeah, that's sort of like what we were talking about with that plan that was dreamed up back in the late 80s, early 90s. Yeah. I mean, it is obviously very complicated to try to imagine this all coming together in a way that makes everybody happy. So I don't know. All right. I sent my invite over to Michael Batista. I don't know if he's going to see it. I think as we approach an hour, probably better if we just move on from this, because we've talked a lot of Cosmos, and maybe we'll bring Michael on in the near future to talk about the continuing evolution of this Cosmos 3.0 project. All right. Yeah, that's what we're going to do. That's what I've decided, that we're going to wrap this thing up. Shout out to Robert Kerr, who's not with us today. Appreciate you guys hanging out with me all by myself on a Friday. Please, again, become a member if you want to support the show, get a little extra bonus stuff, access to the Discord, MK Ultras. I think it's $3.99 a month. The more of those we get, the better we'll do. If you have not already liked and subscribed, go through all the videos. Just like take 10 minutes out of your day and just like all the videos. But also subscribe, and then also tell somebody about this show. That's the best way to help us out. Tell somebody about the show, and they can. And if they find us and tell somebody else, then maybe we'll be on our way to what we want to do in American soccer and here on YouTube. We are a podcast. You can get us as a podcast in places wherever you find your podcast. Spotify is a good place to do that. If you just want to kick us a couple of bucks and not become a member and that commitment, you can do that on coffee.com/morningkickaround. You can see it there on your screen. We do have social media, mkickaround on X, Instagram, Blue Sky. You'll see me tagging mkickaround on Blue Sky on a regular basis. By the way, I'm on Blue Sky at Davis Jason if you want to look me up over there. I'll again plug my newsletter, which is Jason Davis Soccer Eagle on ghost.io. You can look for that. I got some Cosmos stuff in there and some other things. I posted a couple of videos. In fact, I posted a video that I made in 2018 about the history of the New York Cosmos with Nipun Chopra. It was a show we did called Lower League America. I ran that for a little while. So if you want a little bit of a look at the Cosmos up to that moment, then you can go get that on YouTube as well, or go to my newsletter and it's embedded there and you can watch it there. All right. I think that's probably it. I feel like there's more to talk about, but that's it on a Friday. Thank you very much for watching Morning Kick Around. Enjoy your football.